Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging into F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. It's a novel that just seems soaked in Jazz Age glamour, right?
Absolutely. But, beneath all that sparkle, there's this really deep look at ambition, wealth, and, well, that big idea of the American dream.
Exactly. And you asked us to really dig into why this story sticks with us, what makes it so powerful. So that's what we're doing today.
Yeah, and to do that, we've pulled together quite a bit. We've got literary analysis, some crucial historical context about the Roaring Twenties, and different critical views on the book.
Our goal here is pretty straightforward.
Mm.
Let's unpack what makes Gatsby such a lasting statement on, chasing success and the whole American dream concept,
Yeah.
but without getting bogged down in overly academic talk.
Right. Let's make it make sense.
So let's just dive in. Is The Great Gatsby really the quintessential story of the American dream? What do you think?
Well, in a lot of ways, yeah. The sources we looked at definitely lean that way. It touches all those classic bases, doesn't it?
Like what?
Striving for huge success, trying to just erase your past, the search for happiness, and of course the potential tragedy of it all. The novel shows that side pretty starkly.
And it's all set against this incredibly vibrant backdrop of the Jazz Age, a term Fitzgerald actually coined himself.
Right, that post-World War I era, the 20s moving into the 30s, it feels defined by, well, pleasure-seeking almost decadence.
How does that specific setting, that atmosphere, feed into the novel's themes? Does it crank them up?
Oh, definitely. That whole post-war focus on living it up, on indulgence, it's absolutely key. It created this feeling that, these massive, extravagant dreams weren't just possible, they were almost expected.
And Gatsby's dream fits right in.
Perfectly. The classic rags to riches story, aiming for this life of just unbelievable luxury. It really captures the aspirational mood of the time.
But it sounds like Fitzgerald himself was maybe a bit skeptical. The sources say he saw the American dream as a dangerous romantic myth.
Yeah, he definitely seems to have had a more critical perspective, which makes you wonder about how the book was first received, right, back in 1925.
Exactly. How did it actually land?
Yeah.
Because now it's this huge classic.
Well, initially, not so well. The research
Mhm.
shows it sold pretty modestly. It even kind of faded for a while.
Really? Why do you think that was?
It's likely the times just shifted. You had the Great Depression coming, then World War II. Stories about, ridiculously wealthy people throwing lavish parties probably felt pretty out of touch, pretty distant for a lot of readers during those tough years.
That's such a contrast to its status now. It feels almost like required reading.
It really is. It's amazing how it became this, undisputed classic in American literature, something almost everyone reads in school. And all the adaptations, movies, opera, plays, it just shows how much it's captured our imagination over time.
And we see this whole glittering, maybe flawed world through the eyes of Nick Carraway. He calls himself a middle-class Middle Westerner. How does his perspective as an outsider looking in shape how we understand this Fitzgerald version of the American dream?
Nick's viewpoint is so, so crucial. He's our narrator, our guide. He gets pulled into this dazzling world of West Egg, but he also sees the emptiness behind it.
So he starts to see the cost.
Exactly. He sees the high price of materialism, envy, and desire, as one source puts it. He watches Gatsby's relentless chase and ultimately seems to conclude that the dream, like Gatsby's giant house, might just be hollow, or maybe it was never really there to begin with.
It's interesting, too, that some analysis suggests Fitzgerald saw parts of himself in both Gatsby the dreamer, with those fatal flaws, and Nick, the more detached watcher. That tension must add layers.
Absolutely. That duality likely fueled the novel's complexity.
Now, here's something that really jumped out at me from the research. The actual phrase American Dream wasn't widely used, wasn't put into print until 1931. That's after Gatsby came out.
That's a fantastic point. It really makes you think, doesn't it? You could almost argue that Gatsby, with its incredibly powerful story about aspiration and its dark side, might have actually helped create the myth in the popular imagination.
So he wasn't just tapping into something already there. He was maybe helping to build it.
Possibly. Helping to define what people later called the American dream.
But one of the scholars we looked at, Tara Carter, she raises a really important question about whose dream we're actually seeing in the novel.
Yes, that's a key critique. Carter argues Fitzgerald really zooms in on what she calls the traditional white American dream, meaning one that's really tied up with capitalism, buying things, getting stuff, and climbing the social ladder. She points out that even though the book is critical of its rich characters, It mostly shows us this dream from inside a pretty privileged white world. There isn't much perspective beyond that.
That's a really important lens to consider. Okay, let's focus on Gatsby himself. We hear self-made man thrown around a lot. How true is that for Jay Gatsby? Is he genuinely self-made, or is it more smoke and mirrors?
Well, the book gives us his backstory. He was born James Gatz. His parents were described as shiftless and unsuccessful farm people. He consciously ditches that past, changes his name at 17.
So a deliberate break.
A very deliberate break.
Okay.
And his early life sounds genuinely tough. Clam digger, salmon fisher, a far cry from the West Egg Mansion.
So what changed? What was the turning point?
Meeting Dan Cody seems to be it. Working on Cody's yacht introduced him to wealth, to a different way of life. Cody apparently wanted to leave him his fortune, but there were legal issues, and Gatsby only ended up with about $25,000.
Not nearly enough to fund those parties.
Not even close, which strongly suggests his later fortune came from, well, other places. Less reputable ones, probably.
And we see him actively building this new identity, right? Trying so hard to fit into that old money Anglo-American elite.
Oh, meticulously. The sources point to things like his clothes, getting them from a man in England. It suggests he's imitating wealth, not born into it. Even his haircut, it's all part of crafting this image.
Like a performance.
Exactly. And then you have Meyer Wolfsheim saying, quite bluntly, I made him, raised him up out of nothing, right out of the gutter. That really emphasizes how constructed Gatsby's persona is.
And it's not just Gatsby playing a part, is it? Other characters seem to be doing it too, like Myrtle Wilson.
Absolutely. Myrtle's attempts to seem more worldly and sophisticated when she goes into the city, changing her clothes, putting on airs, it's very similar.
She thinks the fancy clothes will change who she is.
It seems so. She believes the trappings of wealth will give her a new identity and subsequently a new status. It's the same core belief Gatsby has, really.
That buying the right things, looking the right way, will lead to happiness and acceptance. But for both of them, it ends badly.
Very badly. The irony is just crushing. For both Gatsby and Myrtle, chasing that dream of wealth and status leads directly to misery and destruction. Their stories are a pretty stark warning about the potential emptiness of it all.
And the novel is quite blunt about the dodgy paths some characters take to climb that ladder, isn't it? The ethical compromises.
That's a really central theme. The analysis we read highlights how success in the novel often involves lies, oppression, or breaking laws. Myrtle lies about her affair, trying to trade up.
And Gatsby.
Gatsby's whole life is built on a constructed identity. And then there are the illegal dealings, the drug and oil stuff, maybe bootlegging and gambling through Wolfsheim, all supposedly to become worthy of Daisy.
Then you have someone like Tom Buchanan. His idea of the American dream seems totally different. It's about entitlement, keeping people out.
Exactly. He looks down on Gatsby's money because it's new. It's tainted in his eyes. It doesn't have that inherited status.
And his anxieties go beyond just class, right? There's that racism too.
Definitely. His fear about the white race being submerged by other races, his clear contempt for someone like Wolfsheim, it reveals this really ugly, exclusionary foundation to his worldview, his sense of who deserves success.
If we zoom back out to the historical setting for a sec, that Jazz Age, it feels like it's almost shaping the dream itself in the novel. The possibilities, but also the dangers.
Oh, it's way more than just scenery. Fitzgerald named the era, didn't he? For that feeling of frivolity, decadence, and pleasure after the war, even with prohibition going on.
The time of big changes.
Huge changes. Women got the vote, exploring new freedoms, and jazz music itself became this potent symbol.
How so? Jazz as a symbol of the dream.
Well, the sources suggest it kind of represented a musical rags to riches story, a sound of freedom, maybe danger too, breaking from old traditions, a real contrast to the stiff old money world.
And the war looms over it all too.
Yeah, World War I, Gatsby, Nick, Fitzgerald himself, they all share that experience, though Fitzgerald didn't fight overseas. And then there's Prohibition. And that created this whole illegal economy, bootlegging, which is likely where Gatsby's money actually came from, through guys like Wolfsheim.
It's amazing how tangled it all is, the history, the characters, the dream. Now, thinking about how critics have seen the book over the years, it sounds like the interpretations have really shifted.
They really have. Like we said, it started off kind of slow, but over time, wow, it became recognized as this absolute masterpiece offering real insights into the American experience.
And Gatsby himself, people see him in totally different ways.
Oh, completely. The interpretations are all over the map. Some see him as a classic romantic on this doomed quest. Others see a sinister gangster. Some even find him profoundly comic or a pathological narcissist.
That huge range just shows how complex he is, doesn't it?
Yeah.
One source even said Gatsby is an invention, created partly by himself, but also by how others see him.
Exactly. Which leads to that big question people always debate. Is The Great Gatsby the great American novel?
The scholar Matthew Brookley definitely thinks so. He calls it the defining novel of the 20s, and Gatsby the great American character.
Right. Brookley's argument is that Gatsby is the self-made, indeed self-invented man. He believes in the American dream, he achieves it, but then the dream itself betrays him.
Brookley admits it's ironic calling Gatsby great, though.
Yeah, but he points to Gatsby's huge capacity to commit himself to his aspirations. That dedication, even if flawed, is part of what makes him compelling.
Okay, one last interesting angle from the research. This idea of the illusion of innate status. Meredith Goldsmith talks about this.
Yeah, Goldsmith looks at how characters try to perform being upper class. She uses Daisy's voice as a key example.
Her voice. How?
Goldsmith suggests Daisy's voice sounds effortlessly classy, like it's just naturally part of her. It contrasts sharply with Gatsby's more obviously learned in speech, or Wolfsheim's, whose immigrant accent marks him as different. It highlights anxieties about who really belongs.
So Wolsham's way of talking, like Oxford, marks him as an outsider trying to copy.
Kind of. It's seen as a degraded copy, playing into those social hierarchy fears. But Goldsmith also notes something interesting via Jordan Baker's observation about Daisy.
What's that?
Jordan senses this tension in Daisy's thrilling voice, a conflict between repression and desire. It hints that maybe even Daisy's seemingly natural upper-class presentation is also constructed, carefully managed.
Wow. So wrapping up this deep dive, it's really clear. The Great Gatsby isn't just a simple story. It's this complex, critical look at the American dream.
Definitely. It shows the pull, the allure of reinventing yourself, but it's also brutally honest about the potential for illusion, the ethical costs, and, well, the tragedy that can follow.
But really lays it all out there.
That's a great way to put it. And it leaves us and you listening with something to chew on, I think. Well, thinking about Gatsby's fate and all these different ways people read him, what do you think is the real price of chasing the American dream, at least as Fitzgerald shows it? And maybe how has that whole picture changed since the glittering but ultimately dark jazz age?
Definitely something to ponder. A lot to think about there.